Before I start today's review, I want to make a couple things clear. First of all, the game that you're about to see is not compatible with the PlayStation TV. So all of the footage that you see here is going to be taken from the web that I have found. Just note, if you see this review on my channel and think that it's compatible with the PlayStation TV, I am warning you now that it is not. Now let's get on to the review. Arc System Works fighting games have been in the news a lot lately, mostly because Dragon Ball FighterZ just came out. Plus, handheld gamers are looking forward to this summer's BlazBlue Cross-Tag Battle. But handheld gamers don't have to wait until summer to get a new Arc System Works game. A game that they helped with just released on the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation Vita. The newest update to the game Under Night in Birth, which released way back on PC as well as the PlayStation 3. In its final update and the game's debut on a handheld platform, let's dive in and see how this new game is. Here is my review of the PlayStation Vita version of the oddly named fighting game, Under Night in Birth, EXE Latest. Under Night in Birth shows a modern-like world with rumors going around that there are portals at night that take people to a nexus of sorts, a strange type of bridge world between our own world and the realm where shadow-like monsters known as voids live. These voids pass into this nexus and feed on the souls of the humans there, killing a lot of their victims, but corrupting the survivors, allowing those survivors to unlock special abilities and become in-births, utilizing a special type of energy to have supernatural powers. This leads a lot of in-births to create organizations, have turf wars, fight amongst themselves, and others that have much grander schemes in mind, wanting even more power so they can rule over all of the in-births. The actual story that's shown in Under Night in Birth is about one such leader who aims to basically obtain the ultimate power and destroy anyone in her path, whether they are human, void, or in-birth, along with the various organizations that are mobilizing to stop her. Now that summary makes it feel like there's a lot of story involved in Under Night in Birth, but the first two versions of the game that released on PC and PlayStation 3 didn't have much story to them at all. You had arcade mode, and you got a couple very short cutscenes as you played arcade mode, throwing around a lot of terminology like voids, amnesia, nightblade, and none of them were really explained that well, so the story of Under Night in Birth was basically a convoluted mess of confusion. This version of the game changes all that, because they added a new story mode known as Chronicles Mode, a 22-chapter visual novel that gives you backstories for almost all of the playable characters, an origin story into the lore of Under Night in Birth's world, and a lot of explanations of how everyone in the game get to where they are when the arcade mode story begins, or the climax of the actual game story begins. Now, I love Chronicles Mode because it's like a visual novel. It's like you go out of fighting game mode and there's this extensive visual novel thrown into the mix. But the translation is a problem. I don't typically get bothered if there's an incorrect word or spelling mistake here and there, but there are a lot of typos in this game. After I'd cleared about 3 or 4 chapters of Chronicle Mode, I started counting, and by the time I finished, I'd come across well over 120 mistakes, from spelling errors to incorrect word placement. Now do note that this is based upon the Europe version of the game that P-Cube localized. I don't know if the Access Games North American version is the same, but I've reached out to Access Games about it, and as soon as I find out any information, I'm sure I'll make another video to let you guys know. By gameplay, it's hard for me to say that this is just a 2D fighting game. Chronicles Mode more than doubles the game's length, so we're going to call it a cross between a 2D fighting game and a visual novel. You've got all of your game modes that you can use as a fighting game, plus you've got the very in-depth Chronicles mode that makes the game feel like a visual novel with no fighting involved at all. Now, speaking of Chronicles mode, this is the third release of Under Night in Birth, or the third update to the game. So, let's talk about what's new. EXE Latest adds new playable characters, balancing issues to current playable characters, of course, and importantly, the new story mode known as Chronicles mode. Now, as far as the other game modes are concerned, because I've already talked about Chronicles mode and how much I like it, you have your typical 2D fighting game scenario. You've got your story mode through arcade mode, you've got versus mode where you can play against the AI, you've got score attack, time attack, and survival for different ways to play against the AI, and you've got your multiplayer modes to play against other players, whether it's online through the PlayStation Network or ad hoc through local multiplayer. And once you start going into actual combat, when you go into arcade mode or versus mode or online, you've got your typical Arc System Works 2D fighting game like Guilty Gear or BlazBlue. You've got 20 characters to choose from, you're on a 2D stage, and you've got 3 different types of attacks with tons and tons of combos thrown into the mix. Now, one thing I like is that this game isn't just some copy-paste, easy-to-learn fighting game. You've got Lyn, the protagonist, who is easy to create combos with just by button mashing her heavy attack option, but you've also got a lot of other characters like Phonon or Yuzu who have very different ways of playing, and you can't just button mash your way through every fight unless you're on the very, very lowest difficulty setting. There's a lot of strategy, and it takes a lot of time to learn each individual character. And outside of these combos, which is typical fighting game fare, you also have the other gameplay systems like the EXS energy system, allowing you to charge up your energy, similar how you can charge up your ki in Dragon Ball fighting games, and enter this special Berserk mode where all of your stats are increased and you unlock the ability to use your ultimate attacks. Now, as we conclude the gameplay section, how long is this game? Back on the PlayStation 3, this game wasn't very long for each arcade mode run, but how much is that length increased with Chronicles mode? And with Chronicles mode in mind, you're going to get about 13 to 14 hours out of going through the arcade mode story with all 20 characters. But the Chronicles story mode is easily going to take you 15 to 17 hours at least, bringing the total story-based length of the game to around 27 to 30 hours. That is a lot of time for a fighting game. With presentation, I will admit that I'm a little disappointed. The visual presentation of the environments, of the visual novel renders, all of that is great, pristine, and pretty much flawless. The in-game combat character renders are not. Back when Arc System started making PlayStation Vita games with games like BlazBlue Chrono Phantasma, the games looked great. The renders were easily PS3 level and almost flawless. In this game, the character renders have jagged edges everywhere, they look a little blurry. It doesn't really affect the performance of the game, but they look more PlayStation Portable tier. It's just not nearly as polished as it should be. In conclusion, Under Night in Birth EXE Latest is a game that's really for fighting fans as well as visual novel fans, despite my problems with the translation and the graphical style of the character renders. It's a fun fighting game with tons of game modes and more lore and story content than you will know what to do with. Even if you're a fan of visual novels and not a fan of fighting games, it's definitely worth your money. Reviews to Go rates Under Night in Birth EXE Latest for the PlayStation Vita an 8 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below or head to the website at www.reviewstogo.com.